Hey everybody, this is Andrew Brown and welcome to the AWS Cloud Project Bootcamp as we continue on with week 2 of our required homework. So there are a few things that we want to achieve. We did Honeycomb in the live stream. We want to implement XRay, Rollbar, and CloudWatch logs. So the next thing is XRay. This is very similar to Honeycomb. It's AWS's built-in solution. But when we say built-in, does not mean it is easy to use in all use cases. When we are using AWS Lambda and Elastic Beanstalk, we get XRay configured a lot easier. When we're using ECS containers, it is a lot more difficult. Even instrumenting XRay is a lot more difficult. So you might find this experience much more challenging than the Honeycomb, but hopefully I will make it as easy as I can. Just carefully watch along because, again, this one is a bit hard. So what we'll do is we will open up my repository where we have general instructions. Remember, these instructions aren't one-to-one. If you saw our live stream, we definitely did not follow the instructions one-to-one. So remember to watch the videos to make sure you are doing it the way that it needs to be done to work. So making my week into week 2, we have generalized instructions for XRay. So what I'm going to do is go over here and I'm going to create a new branch. Remember, I branch, you do not branch. You work in your main, and the reason I do branching is so you can find isolate parts of code base and so that it's easier for you to navigate my code base. But when I marking grading, I just want to see main. I don't want to see any branches. I don't want to dig around. I won't even look. So what I need to do is create myself a new branch. I'm going to view all branches. Again, I'm only doing this to show you stuff. I'm going to go week 2, and this will be XRay. And we'll go ahead and create that branch. So that branch is now created. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to drop down. We're going to go to XRay, and we're going to go ahead and open this in Gitpod. I will give that a moment to load. So it shouldn't take too long. Now, the thing with XRay is in order to make it work, you have to have a daemon. I like saying daemon. That's definitely not how it's pronounced. It's daemon. But this is basically another container, another app that runs alongside your application, which you send the data to, and then it collects it, batches it, and sends it over to the XRay API so that you can visualize your data in XRay. So this is the part that kind of makes it more difficult because when we used Honeycomb, we did not have to do that. So that will be the part that will be a bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is go back over to Gitpod and see that it has ran. And in today's class, someone was saying, well, why can't we just do that npm install so we don't have to keep running it? And I'm going to do that right now. So I'm going to go here. We're kind of going off on a tangent here, but we'll say React.js. And from here, I will go to the command. We could do init, but I'd rather do command here, and we'll do npm install. I have to go to the right folder, though. Workspaces, workspace. I don't have to cd workspace. I need to cd into front-end React.js. And so what this will do is that it will make it so that we don't have to do npm install every time we start up. There was also another solution shared, which I have yet to investigate, that might be easier to do with our Docker Compose file. I'm going to say update our Gitpod YAML file to install npm install. There's lots of ways of doing things, so just understand that sometimes I'm not always doing it the best way, and if you can figure out the better way and document it, you'll get points from me for solving that, and I don't mind being wrong. I just want everyone to learn and to do their best and make sure we get through these things. So anyway, I'm just going to cd into that directory for the time being. We'll do an npm install. We'll give that a moment to run. Shouldn't take too long. We'll take a look at the instructions. So the first thing we're going to have to do is install the AWS SDK. The SDK, I think this might be the first time we're using the SDK, so I'm going to look up the SDK documentation for AWS. And we can go over here to documentation. I'm looking just for SDK in general. SDK and tools on the right-hand side. And so you can see that it has it for JavaScript, Python, PHP, .NET, Ruby, Java, Go, Node.js, C++, Android, iOS. In my opinion, the Ruby one is the best written documentation. Python is the one that the AWS CLI and SDK are built in. So this one has been very popular for a long time. For some reason, they call the Python one Boto 3. Why, I don't know. All the other SDKs are just normally named, but for some reason, the Python one is called Boto 3. Don't ask me why. If we scroll on down, we have our API reference here, and this is going to tell us all the available services. So if I just expand this here, the idea is if we're working with XRay, we could probably type in XRay, click here, and we could see some example codes. So there's a bunch of stuff here. Sometimes it shows you how to configure it initially. So here it says import Boto, put the client in. So you get kind of an idea of things that you can do. Again, I think, the Ruby one is better documented, but we're not using Ruby today. So we will go back over here to Git pod. We will cd back a directory. I'm typing clear to clean things up. And we will go back over here and we'll grab the AWS XRay SDK. The question is like, where do you know where these are? Probably if we go to Boto 3 and look at GitHub, this is my guess is that's going to be broken up into packages. So if we just expand this for a second and click into Boto 3, I've never done this before, but I've worked with a lot of SDKs, so I know how it generally is. And so what I'm looking for is the different ways of how you include them. So I'm just looking for it. Nothing that is indicative of where it is. Scroll on down here. How do we know to just install one part of the SDK? So I'm going to type in AWS XRay SDK here. Python. I know how it works for Ruby, so I'm trying to find the equivalent there. So this is AWS SDK Python. So are we not using Boto 3 and we're using our own? XRay supports OpenTelemetry Python, the AWS distro. Oh, okay. So are we not using Boto in this case? Oh, we're not. All right. I don't remember. I just know that we're using it. So I guess we are actually not using Boto. It probably is using Boto underneath, but we are using a different library altogether called AWS XRay SDK. So that sounds great. What we'll do is go over to our code. We will open up our backend Flask. We will open up the requirements tab. I clicked on the README by accident, and we need to add that line in there. So it is going to be AWS SDK here. Okay, and from here, I'll do ls. I'll do a backend Flask here, and then we'll do pip install -t or -r requirements.txt, and that should install that requirement there. We'll go back over to the documentation here. I'm just seeing if there's anything for instrumentation, like how to do it. So here they show the configuration with the core and the recorder. They show some configuration that you have to put in. They're showing like how to do segments and stuff like that. Subsegments, similar to spans, I suppose. So what we'll do is we'll go back over to our code and look at what we have here. So we have the AWS SDK core Ray recorder. We have some middleware. And I think this is because we are using Flask. So if we looked up like XRay Flask, I'm just trying to find where the source code came from. We might be able to find some examples. It's always good to see where stuff is coming from so you can find it on your own. And here we can see that adding the middleware to your Django application. You might be asking, what is middleware? Why do they say middleware? When you're working with web frameworks, they have this concept of middleware, and middleware is basically software that sits in front of your software. Maybe I could find a diagram. So what is middleware for web applications? And we'll see if we can pull up an image that indicates it. So this is a good example. It's something that sits in between your application I'm just looking through here. Yeah, so not the best example, but the idea is that you have your application and it sits in front of it and you can have multiple middlewares. I might pull up something to scribble on. It might be better to make it clearer. I'm just going to make a blank slide here so I can scribble. Here we go. Just delete this out, go to the pen tool. So the idea here is that you have an application. That's our app. And you have an incoming request. So that'd be your request. And the idea is that middleware is stuff that, I'm gonna make this a bit bigger. Middleware is, well, that was fine before. So this is our app for A. So middleware is, the idea is that you can pass filtering, post-processing, formatting of incoming requests before they make it to the application. So you could have middleware that is designed to handle authentication, right? Authentication, and then you wouldn't have to handle it in your application. You could have middleware that would whitelist or blacklist certain addresses. You could have middleware that maybe it would make sure that files aren't too large, or maybe they have to be of a particular format and filter them out. A lot of times it could be for things like CSFR, so that is like make sure things people aren't tampering with the pages. So there's all sorts of things that you can do. You can see that security, sessions, CSFR, stuff like that. And so the advantage of having middleware and with specifically for tracing is that for every single request that goes through, we can extract information out of it for the actual trace, the span, and things like that. We kind of did that when we installed, if we go back over to here when we're doing Honeycomb, we installed something about requests here. If we go to requirements.txt. So this here could have been middleware. We didn't specify it directly, but it could be installed in a sense like middleware. But anyway, what we'll do is we will go back over to here, to our code, wherever it was, here, and bring this in. So we'll grab these two. I'll go down below, paste that in, and here we'll say XRay for that. So we have the recorder, and then we have the middleware for Flask so that it captures all that stuff for XRay. Now the thing is here is that this one up here is using OpenTelemetry. Now there probably is a way to do it with XRay as well. In fact, I think this library does use OpenTelemetry. Does it not? XRay supports OpenTelemetry for the distro collector instrument, the SDK industry-wide. They provide some instrumentations, but may not be feature complete. If you want additional features, please open it up. Okay, so I think this is saying that, so is this thing using OpenTelemetry or not? And the reason why I question that is because we're adding a middleware specifically for Flask. And so it might be collecting XRay specific data. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to us if this works, but I'm just saying that it's good to use OpenTelemetry as when we can. I'm just not 100% sure if it's actually doing it. I don't think it is. So anyway, that's the imports there. We'll bring this down here. And then this stuff is going to be for starting the recorder. Okay. And we have an AWS XRay URL. So this is the URL that we have to point to so that the endpoint where it knows where to send the data. We have the recorder. It's going to start on the service called Crutter. I guess the service is actually backend Flask because we learned this when talking to Jessica that we should be naming these based on what they are, not necessarily what the project is as a whole, which was a mistake on my part. So we will adjust that. And it makes sense to actually hard code these values as that was recommended by Jessica as well. And I think that is good advice. So we're going to go back over here. And then we need to create this XRay JSON file. So I'll copy this. This is for setting up the sampling rules, and we'll talk about that when we get into XRay in a moment here. So I'll make this, and we'll call this XRay JSON. And we will paste this in. The rule name is fine. It's for Crutter. The service that we're doing this for is actually the backend Flask app, so we'll adjust that. Service type is fine. All this other stuff is fine. We'll talk about it here in when we actually start collecting data and playing around with that sampling file. The next thing is we need to create an XRay group. We don't actually have to do this right away. but it's something we should eventually do. This looks old because I don't remember having to do fault or error. Because if we do fault or error, that means that the only time it will report is when that stuff happens. It has the Flask address there. I remember doing something else there for the service. If it's filtering on the service name, then we probably could call it backend Flask because that's how we name the service. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to follow exactly as shown here, but I'm going to go over to here. We'll type in clear. I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to adjust this to be backend Flask. Okay. Group name is fine because we want it grouped under there. I'm going to hit enter. And it says Crutter already exists. It's because I've ran this earlier and I thought I deleted it out. When I refresh this, I don't see anything. We're under XRay. So what you can do here is just make your way over to XRay. Be sure to check what region you're in. That really does matter. I'm trying to run everything in CA Central. A lot of times XRay gives you this new UI. It's very confusing or the old UI. And it doesn't always show you that tab. So I have to hit try it in our new console, which takes us over to CloudWatch logs, I think. It does. And then the idea is I need to find the group. So yeah, the UI is a bit frustrating. I'm trying to find the actual group and it's not showing it to me here. And we've integrated into CloudWatch logs. Okay, but I want the new console experience and they keep taking me over to the wrong place. So I'll take that out at the top here. What a pain in the butt. Let's click Get Started. Try out the new console. I don't want to go over to CloudWatch logs. I don't know why it's doing this. Because I can't see all the options. Let's see here. Oh, it's over here. Okay, so the thing I'm confused about is if you go to CloudWatch, it usually looks a bit different than this, or at least that's what I thought. Yeah, so yeah, I really don't know. I guess this here is creating a group. In the old interface, it showed up somewhere else, so I'm just not confident whether this group name is the log. I don't think so. This is something I made for something else, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this log so we're not confused. I'm going to go back to the XRay UI and try to get it to show me what I want to see. I might actually, oh, look at that. Now it's showing me more information. So sometimes you have to kind of goof around with it, but on the left-hand side, this is what I was looking for was more information because under here we have groups. And we can't find that in the CloudWatch area. So there's definitely something wrong, going wrong on the UI. Here, this was the old group, and you can see how it's saying service, Crutter, and stuff like that. So I'll go ahead and delete this. This default one was there before. So that is what we're looking for here. Okay. And so I'll go back, and I will hit up and hit enter. Okay, so when we get back JSON like that, that generally means that it's worked. We'll go back over here to XRay. We'll refresh. And so we can see it. It's going to filter on the backend Flask. So these groups are used to group traces together. We don't necessarily have to have a group, but it will make things easier as we go. We might have messed up the filter expression, so if this doesn't work, that's totally fine. We're going to go back to our documentation here. And the next thing we need to do is create a sampling rule. Again, there probably is some default sampling somewhere here, I imagine. To go to the correct tab. Where did it go? Oh boy, AWS, you're giving me a hard time today. Go here. We'll go to CA Central. and it's still not showing us everything. We'll give this a refresh. So I just cleared that stuff out of the top. So it looks like when we have to get to it, we have /service map. So over here we have sampling. Sampling determines how much information you want to see. When you create an application, you don't necessarily want to collect on every single data point because it can get really expensive really fast. And so sampling is to say, show me a percentage of the requests that get through in order to save money. We already have a creditor group. Again, you wouldn't have one because I created this myself. So I'm just trying to look at how I can delete this. So if I checkbox this here, delete. So you would just have a default one here. So you definitely, there's information that can already be collected, but we want to go ahead and create our sampling rule. So I'll go and copy this and paste it in here. Whoops. And you know, it would be very easy to you copy this in again. It just decided not to work. And that doesn't work. So I'll make a new tab, paste that in. So it would be really easy to just go ahead and create it using ClickOps, like clicking through into the UI or interface. Yeah, over here, if you can create a sampling rule. It's obviously very easy, but the reason we use the AWS CLI or CLI to create records is just because, as you saw, AWS is changing their UI constantly, and it's just a headache to fight with it. So having the CLI is a lot more reliable long-term if you're doing development. Okay, so our rule is there. This is the one that we created. We can change this as we go. I'm going to go back over to here, and we need to set up the daemon. So daemon. So this instructions was originally implemented if we wanted to install it onto our environment. I did not like the solution because I wanted to run it as a container, because when we run ECS EC2, we may have to run the XRay daemon in the cluster in order to get reporting. So that's why I went out and I figured out how to do it for Docker Compose. This was quite the headache to solve, so you're very lucky that I'm just going to provide it to you. But we'll go over here and to our Docker Compose file, and we're going to go ahead and add it. So I'll paste it on down below here. So there's an image called Amazon XRay daemon. I know I keep saying it wrong, but I'm just going to keep saying it wrong. And so we can find that on Docker Hub. Whoops. Here. There is also, the image is hosted in a public repository or registry within ECR. I'm using the one on Docker Hub because, as far as I can tell, it's up to date and it's managed by Amazon. Sometimes it makes sense to source images, repositories, things from the provider, like on their service, like whether it's in ECR or code commit. And other times it's totally acceptable to use it in a third-party marketplace like Docker Hub, but you just have to generally know that. So like when we did the AWS CLI, I did not want people to use Brew to install it, like Homebrew, because I know that it's not well maintained. But this one I know is well maintained, so it's as good as the ones that are in the that are provided in ECR for public use. Okay, so coming back over to here, we have our environment variables. We are passing these that we set locally into this environment. We have a hard-coded region as US East 1. I'm doing CAC Central. You have to change it for whatever region you're running in. So I'm doing that. I'm going to make sure I spelt that right, Central. I did not. We'll go back. We will paste it in. We have the command XRay-O-B. -B is to bind, and it's binding on this address. -O is for something. It's actually important. I just can't remember. I'll find out in 2 seconds. I'm just going to bump up our font so we can see what we're doing here. XRay. Oh, you know what? I just remembered why. So the reason why we bind on port 0 is that we wanted to ignore user data metadata because XRay by default thinks that it's going to run on a virtual machine. And so that -O is to say, hey, you're not running on a virtual machine. Don't reach out to AWS metadata. Even with that flag, I found that it was still kind of reaching out. So I don't know if our configuration is correct, but I know that it works. So I'm not going to fiddle with it any further to get rid of warnings that don't matter. But we've added that to our file. We need to add a couple of environment variables into our backend here, up here. So we have these two here, so I'll go ahead and copy them. And we will paste them in. So the first one is the AWS XRay URL. So we are providing this as it. If we go over to the app.py file here, where we have this, the dynamic naming. So it's not that we're providing an endpoint. I said earlier that it was going to the AWS XRay endpoint, but this is clearly just a dynamic value being set. So if we go here and look it up, dynamic naming XRay, AWS, we don't want real X-rays here. And just look it up, dynamic, whoops. For web application, you might want to name the segment using host names. You can pass a pattern with wildcard and represent any combination of characters and represent a single character. So you basically can put anything you want there, but they are showing a domain. And so we are showing a domain where it is currently in our developer environment. So I guess that is valid. It's a good idea to have that there. Make sure that's 4567. That is the port we are using for the backend. So those two look great. We're going to make our way back over here. We have this command that we can use to check the graph to see if we have data, but that might be as simple as it will take to instrument XRay. If this doesn't seem as hard as Honeycomb, I'm going to just tell you, if you had to do this from scratch and we didn't have these instructions, you would have spent days and days with myself and the other Bako trying to figure it out. It really isn't that easy. So we'll go here and say instrument XRay. We'll go ahead and commit that, sync it, and let's go ahead and see if this works. So we'll do compose up. Here it's pulling the XRay daemon. And I am still a little bit sick, so sorry for the sniffles. While that's going, we can look at some of the instructions for XRay. So might be interesting to see how we can instrument things in our code. So XRay Python instrument. I think we saw it actually on the documentation for the XRay SDK Python. If we go down here and scroll down, I'm just curious what we could see. Custom segment, and subsegments. This is basically your spans. So it looks similar to what we did with OpenTelemetry. So you have put metadata, so that's your like attributes. And you can see you have a key, dictionary, namespace, information. Then there's annotation. There is a difference between metadata and annotation for XRay. It's in my course for the developer, I believe. And the difference is like one you can filter on, the other one you can't. So like if you need to filter based on data, you have to put it in as metadata, whereas annotation is just notes that show up in your spans. I showed an async version here. That's kind of interesting. And then there's another way to write it, I suppose. And yeah, oversampling is always a big issue because you can't see what's going on there. But we'll make our way back over to here and see if everything is running. I'm going to make my way over to ports. 3000 is running, 4567 is not running, the daemon is not running. So So far for being easy. We are going to go here. I'm going to, well, this one says it's running, but it's showing as it not being served. Okay, well, let's take a look at the back end here and see what the issue is. It says app is not defined. So maybe we placed our code in the wrong spot. We'll go back over here. And yeah, app is called here. So this code actually has to appear under here. I'll copy that and we will paste that in here. Oops. And we will attempt to put this code back up. So we'll do up. Yeah, we'll give it a moment. I'm just going to have a small stretch back here. My neck is hurting. And we'll give it a moment. There we go. Let's take a look. Okay, so the back is running, the front is running. It says that's not running, but if we go over here, it says it's running up here. So they're all green, so maybe we'll just ignore that dot. I'm not sure why it's doing that. If we go into the terminal here, expand it. Right now we are looking at the logs for everything, so we will see both logs for the Flask application and also the daemon. And so I'm going to just open a new tab over here. We're going to type in API activities home. If we go back to the terminal, we should see logging. Refresh. No. So I guess what we'll have to do is just right click and view it individually. We'll view the logs for the Flask app first. Okay, so this is from before, but you can see that this is getting called 200, no problem. I am seeing errors up here. When calling get sampling rules operation, bad gateway, what is this failing on? Is this for XRay? It is. So it's saying here, a 502 occurred when calling the get sampling rules operation, bad gateway. Sounds like we have an authentication problem or there's something that is misconfigured. If we go over into the daemon, I will open it up here. Send request failed, look up XRay, etc. No such host. So I'm noticing here there's a spelling mistake. It says can, so I must have spelled something wrong because that address is incorrect. So we will go back over to Docker Compose, and we'll see where we got that wrong. We'll check the backend here. So there's our problem. We'll save that. We'll do Docker up or Compose up. We'll give it a moment to rebuild. Now, James doesn't run the build step in here, and this could be the reason why, because if there is no need to rebuild and you're just changing environment variable, maybe it'd be faster if you added a flag there and sped that up. I don't know what that flag is off the top of my head. I'm not going to worry about it, so we will just take our time and let it rebuild them all and do whatever it wants. Okay, so we'll make our way back over to the ports. We'll open up 4567 again. I don't actually think we have to because we already have this here. We will refresh this a few times. We will go back over to our logs here. We will check our Python application. Okay, this looks fine. Do we have any errors? Nope, looks fine to me. But how do we know that it's being delivered over to XRay? So we'll open up the logs of the XRay. And here we can see successfully sent segments. So you can see that they're being sent through the daemon. We're going to make our way back over to AWS here. If I can find it. Here we go. And so now the next thing is like, how do we find our data? What we can do is go to traces on the left-hand side. We're in the new console, and you can see that there's some data. We had some errors here a moment ago. That's when we were hitting the home page because we're getting 404s because that page doesn't go anywhere for the API. We can see the node that it is talking about, so we'll run the query. We can see the information. We can click into it. We have a service map. So this is something that Honeycomb has at the enterprise tier. These are nice, but they don't really help unless you have a certain amount of services. For what we're doing, even for the whole scope of this project, traces are good enough. So here is our trace for from XRay. Their spans, they're calling them segments and subsegments, just so you know there. So we've instrumented successfully. I wonder if there's anything else that we can do here. I'm going to go here and just update this to say XRay is now working. I'm going to just see if we can add subsegments in. Capture, decorator. Start a custom segment. So let's try to do that. We'll go over here and we'll make our way into the services. We're going to go into the home activities and we're going to do something similar to what we did before. Again, if we were using open telemetry, we wouldn't have to set this twice because right now we are using XRay's custom configuration. So here we'd say with the XRay recorder. Yeah, how would you do that twice? Because now, like if I do this, you know, so now we kind of run into a problem because we already have that data. So I'll do it on another endpoint. I'm just trying to think one that's really easy to do. We should have notifications in here. Where's our notification service? Create message, create activity. User activities? Well, we'll put it in user activities for now, I guess. I really didn't want that one, though. I wanted notifications. I guess when I branched the work off of it, we don't have that endpoint here. So I'm just trying to find the other one that I'd like to put it on. Well, I think we could do that. What if we do 1 here? Or that wouldn't make sense. How about @Andrew Brown? Does that work? There we go. So I guess that is the segment. So what I'll do is I'll just paste this in here. And then we'll take everything down below here. And we'll call this home activities. I'm just matching the name. I don't know if they let us have that period annotation in there because this is XRay specific, so they might care. Then we have this data in the segment, so I can grab this. And we will do something similar. So we'll paste that in here. It says key dictionary namespace. What is it doing? I'm assuming that's the value that it's putting here. Add metadata or annotation here if necessary. So I'm not 100% sure on this one. We'll just go up here to tab and see what we get. XRay. I'm just trying to find any example of this that looks different. Nope. So I'll just have to give it a go. So like this one's simple because it's that. But when it says like dictionary there, I assume that it wants a Python dictionary. I can never remember what the Python dictionary looks like. So let's just take a quick look there. I think it's a hash. Yeah, it is. It's just a hash. They call those a hash in Ruby. So we could make our own. I guess I could just assign a new one here and we'll just say, do we have to wrap that in strings? Yeah, we do. Now, what is it? Equals or colon? Colon? Colon, okay. I'll go down below here and we'll grab this in ISO format. This is key and namespace. I don't know how that will be, that'll play out, but we'll go back over to here. I want to leave this open. I want to see if this is going to work. So I'll go back over here and hit enter. XRay recorder is not defined. It's because we need to import those. So we'll go back to our app.py. Sorry for the sniffles again. we need this part. So I'll grab this. We'll go back over to our user activities. We will paste it in here. We will go back and refresh. Cannot find the current segment. Please make sure you have an open segment. Please sure you have an open segment. I thought that's what we had to do was just set it. So using context manager for implicit recording, custom segments. Did we not start the segment? Okay, we'll go back over here. What was the error again? X-ray. Begin segment. So we'll go back over to the docs. I remember seeing that before. Start a segment, start a subsegment, add metadata. Okay, so this I thought would have created a segment, but I guess not. So now I don't trust it. So I'm going to bring this back a level. We're going to take this out here. We'll go and use the other example. And we'll say start a new segment. And this is going to be user activities. Okay. And then we can put some data. So this will be the same. Just put this is X-ray. This is X-ray. This is like key and namespace. I'm not really sure what to do with that. We could also do a subsegment. I don't really have a use case for a subsegment right now. Like we could technically make it so that this is the top level segment, and then in here we could have the subsegment as the actual place where we put the metadata on. So we could subsegment, and then we'll just say like, I don't know, mock data. Here is a subsegment. I just don't know what it's going to look like when we do it. So we'll just do this and paste it on in here. We could also take this down here and put it here. Since we have that dictionary, we can also bring that down as well. And we could say results size. And then we do len on that as results. It seems like we're outside of that, so I don't trust it. Our return's still there. So we do model.data, or single quotations data like that. And so that would give us the size of that. So that's two data points that we have. I'm going to go back to our application. Hopefully it works. It does. Good. Refresh, refresh, refresh. We'll go back over here, see if there's any batch data sent. It looks like there's something new. We'll just do it a few more times. Refresh, refresh, refresh. I think so. We'll go back over to X-ray. We'll click back to traces. We'll run our query. That can't be recent. I mean, we did have 500 errors. This does sample, so sometimes we have to hit this a few times before we can see the information. So we'll go back here and just keep hitting until we see some data being returned. If we don't trust it, I'm just going to do a compose up. It's because we're changing code in the sub one. It should refresh it, but I don't trust it. So we'll just restart it, okay? I'll try to get a stretch in as we're waiting. Those are all started. Great. We will go back over to our terminal. I'm going to go check out Docker. We are going to right click here, view the logs. We'll give it a moment. Great, it's running. We'll go back here and refresh. This is in the right, no, I went to back in Flask. I want to go to the daemon. There we go. Remind me later for those alerts. There we go, it sent that one. I'm going to double check to make sure we're not running into any errors, because we could have errors and it's just not telling us. It doesn't look like we're having any errors. We'll go back over here. We'll go back over to XRay and we will run the query again. We have an OK here. We'll click into it. This is for what? That's the home. We can filter on our Crutter app. So this is another thing we could filter on. It's not showing any traces, so probably our group is not named correctly. I thought that would work. Filter by XRay group. How about instead of this? Find traces by typing a query. Well, if I type in API activities home, does it show me? Run. Oh, let's look at some sample queries, I guess. Trace where the URL begins with, etc. So we could grab this in here like this. I'm looking for what it contains, which is this. So maybe we take this and put this in here, and then we say home, run the query. Go back 30 minutes, run the query. So as you can see, it is a little bit hard to filter out X-ray data. You really do have to play with it quite a bit to get it to work. I'll just go back to traces here. Is it running this query or is this something else now? I can't tell. Well, anyway, we can look at the address URL here, maybe. We turn some of these off. Because I'm trying to find this one here. This is 500. Is there any that don't have a 500 error? So we'll click into that. So yeah, none of our subsegments have fired. Now, the segments and subsegments was kind of a stretch goal of something that we could do. But the point is that we have implemented X-ray to a certain degree. I'm not really concerned of whether we can solve this or not. I knew that X-ray is kind of hard to use. If you want to, as your homework stretch goal, figure out how to do segments and subsegments and figure out instrumentation with X-ray, absolutely go ahead and do so. But I'm going to consider this wrapped up and done. So add segments and subsegments. Sometimes it's just not worth the time, like for the required homework. But yeah, there you go. And we'll see you in the next video.